Thank you guys. I see we just had a bunch of people join just now, and I want to welcome you to this panel on maximizing regional impact of federal and state funding. We want to thank California Forward and California Stewardship Network for giving us this opportunity to talk about this important topic. My name is Chelsea Irvine, and I am the Community Resource Manager at 3Corps. We are the Economic Development District for Butte, Glenn, and Tehama counties, and we are located here in beautiful and quite hot Chico. And for those of you who haven't been up here, we are the proud location of Sierra Nevada Brewery. Not that I've been there too many times before, or most Fridays. We are in charge of our comprehensive economic development strategy in the region, and we also run a $6 million loan portfolio in the 3-county region. We are super excited to be one of the newest members of the California Stewardship Network and amplifying the voice of economic development and small businesses in the North State, along with our colleagues at the North State Planning and Development Collective, which is a collaborative involving the Center for Economic Development in Chico State and their Geographical Information Center. So both of us were thrilled to be invited to join the Stewardship Network and really figure out how we can help folks in Sacramento know that the state really exists north of Sacramento, and there's a lot of great things happening up here. So we're excited to be a part of that group. We're excited to be working with such incredible professionals in the economic development field, and we're really happy to see all of you guys here talking about this topic. I know that maximizing regional impact of federal and state funding doesn't sound like this enthralling topic that gets you stopped in your seat and everybody ready to think about it. But I've been thinking about today, how I think about it. And I think we're all in a really unique time where, while there have been generational disparities, and whether it's because of race or, sexual orientation or just, being rural versus urban, we are all different. However, I think this is the one time where the playing field has been most leveled. Every single business has felt the impact of the coronavirus. It's not, here in Butte County, we had the Camp Fire, and it has been heartbreaking and incredibly devastating for the town of Paradise and the surrounding region. But, it's pretty amplified in a little area. COVID-19 knows no boundaries. It is throughout the state, throughout the country, throughout the world that businesses have been affected. And I think now is really the time to start thinking, how can we utilize dollars from our federal and state government and make a bigger impact and work together and collaborate and make a difference to really amp up our business community, make better paying jobs for everyone. It doesn't matter, where you're located, if you're rural, if you're urban. It's really a time to think differently and think about how we can think bigger. And I'm really excited about the panel that we have for you guys today. We have Malinda Matson from the Economic Development Administration. I like to think of her as our rainmaker for everything economic development. She has been incredible working with us particularly, but many different jurisdictions that have gone through disasters in recent years. And I can't tell you the difference that she's made here locally. We've been able to increase staffing, do some great infrastructure projects, and she's just really helps make it happen. And we love her for that. We also have Jessica Hayes, who is a program specialist from the California Department of Housing and Community Development. And she's going to talk to us about community development block grant funds, which, are differently allocated between jurisdictions and some more than others. But I think, again, now is a time to say, how can we streamline these processes? How can we make this the most useful and get the most bang for our buck? And she's going to tell us all about that. And then we have Egon Terplan, and he is from the Governor's Office of Planning and Research and the Strategic Growth Council. And he is going to kind of loop the two together and say how the Governor's Office is paying attention and fostering kind of ground up collaboration and really getting the regions together to think bigger, act in conjunction with each other, and kind of change how we've been, each region focuses on itself, each county does its own thing, and we're not necessarily learning from each other and using best practices and sharing that. And I know in our region, we really have learned that firsthand by, a disaster hits here and then something else happens subsequent over here. And it's really hard, even though you talk to each other, we should be talking about it in between those things so we don't wait and be reactive. So I'm really excited to have the three of these panelists chatting about what funding is available, how to best utilize it, and how we can all work together to really help our business community recover from this incredibly devastating pandemic. And thank you guys all for being here. We want this to be interactive. So if you have any questions for any of the panelists while they're speaking, throw them in the chat. I have Patrick and Julia helping me on the back end to just keep track of all those questions. And we're gonna ask a couple questions after each speaker, and then we'll have some really interactive Q&A towards the end. So I just wanna thank you guys again for attending, and we appreciate you being here. And without further ado, I'm gonna ask Malinda to unmute, and you're the star of the show.
Oh no, it's a failure. No, sorry. Sorry, I had technical difficulties. I didn't know if I was actually going to be able to make it. Our federal computers don't really like Zoom. So anyway, I'm here on my personal computer. So do you have my deck?
Yep.
Okay. Because I don't see somebody's going to, there, okay.
There we go.
Okay. Looking better. So if I could have the, there we go, first slide. Okay. So anyway, good afternoon, and thank you, Chelsea. You know, Chelsea and I have worked a lot on campfire recovery projects over the last couple of years. Oh my gosh. And so it's kind of like old home week, at least virtually. But it's good to see you again.
Yes, it's nice to see you.
It's been a while. EDA is the only federal agency whose sole purpose is economic development. There's a lot of other agencies that collaborate with us and coordinate with us, you know, as a shared priority. We're the only ones that do it as our sole mission. And we have been using a bottom-up, locally driven approach for more than 50 years. So when other places were discovering place-based economic development, we were like, well, where have you been all these years? So some of you already know who we are, and you understand us, and there's maybe a few that are new to us. If you are new to us, I would suggest that you go to our website and take a look around. There's a lot of great information there, and it is eda.gov. So Congress has given us a nice little pot of money, 1.5 billion under the CARES Act. 1.467 billion of that is to go for grants. Now, some of that has already been allocated through a non-competitive process. So we have approximately half of that 1.4 billion remaining for competitive applications. But we felt that the non-competitive, to get it out to our existing stakeholders, our economic development districts, and our RLF operators, was important to respond quickly to the pandemic. So this money is made available by amending our existing NOFO, PWEA 2020, that stands for Public Works and Economic Adjustment Act. And you go to grants.gov, which is the primary portal for all federal grants. You can search that PWEAA 2020 and you can find it. We are currently accepting applications, and it is important to note that what we are looking for are projects that are going to help your economy recover and become more resilient from the impacts of the pandemic on your economy. So if we could have the next slide, please. Hopefully you guys are not hearing all those beeps and so forth that are going on here. So eligibility for EDA applications. So it's state and local governments, and that includes counties, incorporated cities, special district, JPAs. There's a lot of different variants here in California, but they're all eligible. And nonprofit organizations, and nonprofits have to be working in cooperation with units of government. So your city or your county. we like a coordinated and collaborated effort, so we don't want people that are, you know, doing their own thing out there. Also eligible are institutions of higher education and Native American tribal governments. So under normal circumstances, we look for economic distress criteria. So it would be high unemployment, low per capita income, if you've had a plant closure, things like that make you eligible for our grants. For the first time in the history of EDA, the entire country is eligible because of the nationwide emergency declaration that went into place in March. So if you're working on an application, you don't have to worry about unemployment numbers or per capita income or anything like that. It's just the special needs criteria for emergency declarations. Okay, next slide, please. So what can you do with these funds? So these funds were attached to our Economic Adjustment Assistance Program, which is our most flexible program in that we can do strategy grants, we can fund revolving loan funds, we can do entrepreneur assistance programs, we can do construction projects. So what we are looking for with this variety of activities are the what you're going to be able to achieve with these projects. And what we want to see is that you are improving your economic ecosystem, that you're going to be able to create or retain jobs, you're going to be able to, you know, support a more entrepreneurial or innovative ecosystem, that you are giving yourself the tools to have a more resilient economy, you know, through strategy development. And if it's a construction project, we really need to see the tie, and you're going to hear this several times during this discussion, the tie between the pandemic and how this project is going to help you become more resilient. Is it going to diversify your economy? Is it going to bring in more high-skilled, high-wage jobs? What's the connection between this project and recovering from the pandemic? So those are the questions, and also in part of this application, you have to address our priorities, EDA priorities, and the one that you have to address is the one for recovery and resilience. Now, this is economic recovery and resilience. So keep that in mind when you're working on your application, you know, if you're applying. Because it's if you read the NOFO, which I strongly suggest you do, the amendment or the last 5 pages is full of really important information about what kind of information to put in there and how to complete your application. So you really have to have a tie between that, the pandemic and how you're going to recover. Now, if you want to address some of our other priorities to have a more competitive application, you're certainly invited to. Those are workforce, manufacturing, trade and foreign direct investment, and opportunity zones. So projects and opportunity zones also address our priorities. And again, let's talk about outcomes for a second. You need to, whether it's a construction or a non-construction application, you really need to talk about the outcomes of your project in terms of economic factors such as job creation, job retention, private investment leveraging. If you're doing an entrepreneurial program, you need to talk about the number of businesses that you're going to be counseling or workshops that you're going to be provided to them. We want to see that impact on your business community. Okay, so next slide, please. Okay, so just briefly, I'm not going to be able to get into a lot of the nitty-gritty in an application. I'm just going to cut, some of the high points here, but there is a match requirement. Because of the special need, we are starting at 80%, or I should actually say it's up to 80%. Now, for construction projects, the match needs to be in cash. For non-construction projects, it can be what is better known as in kind. So that would be staff time or space, or even third-party contributions of time and space, and so forth. An important thing to note, what I call grant math. So it's your grant plus your match equal your total project cost. Match is not a percentage of your grant, it's a percentage of total project cost. It's amazing how many people calculate that wrong. So I'm going to keep saying it, and then one of these days, nobody's going to get it wrong. But yeah, we'll see. So it's also important to note that tribal governments are eligible for a 100% grant rate, and jurisdictions that have exceeded their taxing and borrowing capacity are eligible for a match waiver and eligible for that 100% grant rate. So it is not uncommon in disaster situations that we give out 100% grant. It's not something that is automatic. You have to request the waiver. You have to prove to us that you have been severely impacted by the pandemic, and that there is no way possible that you can raise your match. It's a fairly high bar, but it is possible. Another requirement of our applications is that you have to have a comprehensive economic development strategy in place, and this project that you're supporting has to, this project you're applying for has to be supported by the SEDS. Now, the SEDS are either developed by our economic development districts, which is Chelsea works for one, 3 core, or they're developed by individual counties. So if you do not know that you have a SEDS, you can reach out to my colleague Will Marshall or I. Our contact information will be at the end to find out if you have a SEDS. If you don't have a SEDS and you want to use what we call a SEDS equivalent, which might be like the economic development component of your general plan, if that's up to date and not too old, we might be able to use that, but that's on a case-by-case basis. So a little research you have to do before you can actually get into the writing. So next slide, please. So very quickly, this is a screenshot at the top, or a partial screenshot of grants.gov. I doubt you'll learn to love it, but you will get used to it. Chelsea's shaking her head. You'll see in the upper right-hand corner where it says search and enter keyword. That's where you put the PUIA 2020, and it's listed here. Also, if you look at those blue tabs down there, the third one over, which says related documents, that's where you will find the NOFO and the amendment to the NOFO. That is not the most riveting reading you have ever done, but it is very important reading. I would suggest that you read that. Don't take it to bed with you. And then the fourth one is the package. And under the package, you will find a construction application package and a non-construction application package. There's also one that says construction and non-construction, but I wouldn't use that one. It's just confusing. So go for the construction or the non-construction. And just a note, because people are trying it, if you have a construction application, let's say you want to build a building, well, we're not going to pay to operate the building. So it's one or the other, it's not both. Just the way our rules are written. And at the bottom, we have my contact information and Will Marshall's contact information. Many of you from Southern California probably know him. He has, he's a legend in his own time. He's been with us for many years. great guy. So either one of us, we might refer you to the other one though. But try email first. I rarely get to answer my phone. I often have to let it go to voicemail. So I guess that's it. I get really fast.
Melinda, that was great. And you know, I don't know why you wouldn't take that NOFA to bed. It's a great sleep aid. I know I've fallen to sleep reading it a couple times. A question for you. I know in our area we have been successful in securing EDA funding for, you know, getting a disaster recovery manager for the town of Paradise and widening a road in a commercial district. Do you have a couple other examples of EDA funded activities specifically that you've worked on recently?
Oh, yeah. And so a lot of it depends upon the need of the community. So mostly what we've done in the last few years are disaster recovery projects. And some of them that have been really successful is, you know, so we have a project up in the city of Eureka with the Greater Eureka Chamber of Commerce, and they're running a business assistance center. The businesses can come in there, get access to the internet, get some counseling, do workshops. It's working out very well. We have a project under construction in Santa Rosa to build a workforce development center to help them address their construction worker shortage. So it really depends upon the needs of the community, you know, the projects that have been highlighted in their SEDS, and kind of what the biggest gaps are at the moment. So we can do a lot, but we really want to see, you know, that you can document those impacts of the project.
Perfect. And if somebody listening today was to get together and come up with a great idea and submit their application through grants.gov, how long does it take EDA to make a decision on that application?
So in a perfect world, a construction project would take us 4 to 6 months. A non-construction project should take us 2 to 3 months. We are currently being inundated with applications from the CARES Act. We don't have all of the staff that the CARES Act funding has provided us yet. Some are on board, but they haven't been trained. So I'm anticipating that we're just going to be overwhelmed. We are overwhelmed. We're going to do it as fast as possible, but at least give us 6 months to get through everything. We do look at each application individually. We have at least 3 or 4 sets of eyes on each application. The reviews are thorough. And I promise you we won't lose any. Great.
It's nice to have a little bit of an idea of turnaround time here. I know a lot of us have worked with state and federal agencies, and it could be tomorrow or it could be, you know, a year from now. So thank you for that. And we appreciate all your information, Melinda. We'll have some time again at the end for some questions.
Okay.
So thank you, and stay on the line. But next up, we have Jessica Hayes with the California Department of Housing and Community Development. And she will be talking about the Community Development Block Grant funding for coronavirus economic development. So Jessica, are you there? Somewhere? Are you on mute? I hope. Are you there? Let's see here. Well, it's tricking me because everybody's name is the same, so I can't see if you're there. Jessica, one more time, are you there and just on mute? No? Okay, well, let's see if in the meantime, if we're gonna skip ahead and we're gonna have Egon take his try. He is with the California, the Governor's Office of Planning and Research and the Strategic Growth Council, and he's gonna kind of touch on from the governor's office and from a high level, how they are thinking about regional economic development, collaboration, and kind of bringing all these projects together to have some regional growth. So Egon, go ahead and take it from here.
Great, thank you very much, Chelsea, and very good to be with you all here. I hope everyone can hear me. This is an extremely important conversation, and I think hopefully you all heard the beginning part. My colleague Kate Gordon and many other leaders throughout the state talked about it. So I'm with the Governor's Office of Planning and Research and the Strategic Growth Council, and with Kate and Lenny and my colleague Anish helped launch Regions Rise Together with California Forward as core partners and others. And it was, as you heard from the prior before, it really was an attempt to think about California as a set of regions in a way that we maybe had not done as much in very recent years, and really wanted to understand the state's economy and its distinctiveness. Now, we did that knowing all the variety of the inequities and the challenges facing those regions. Now, in the current moment we're in, we recognize that the economic recovery must also be regional. The impacts were regional, the economies are distinctly regional, and in some ways the conversation today is very much reflective of that. If you go to the next slide, what I wanted to do was just say a couple of words about just kind of the thinking and the framework, and then, because I'm at the Strategic Growth Council, speak a little bit about some of the specific investments that institution has through the California investments from the greenhouse gas reduction funds. But you heard some from Kate and others of what was Regions Rise Together trying to do, and just a couple of additional points I wanted to make. One is this idea of the distinctiveness of the regional economies, and that's why we want to do Regions Up work, but also their interconnectivity. That our regions across California, some of them have very similar sets of industries. Some industries in California you see in many regions: wood and forest products, freight and logistics, and both the opportunities, the impacts, the dynamics of those industries are a little bit different, but also similar across those regions. And in some ways, understanding that and helping ensure that those industries are competitive, have growth and opportunity in the businesses that are there, but also sustainable and inclusive. We are trying to use this frame: high road economic development, high road economic recovery, which really is about trying to lift up opportunities to get people into quality jobs with firms that are really thinking about that long-term potential, that are putting issues of the environment and worker safety and the quality of the jobs front and center. So those principles embed in the work that we do all the time across policy initiatives, but also this idea of really kind of thinking region first. You go to the next slide here. And so some of this, these are kind of ideas that become part of it. And just a couple of things people may have seen, an op-ed that we wrote, for Lenny and Kate wrote, that was in Cal Matters early this year, in another lifetime, it seems. But I want to emphasize that the principles still hold. We are all learning a lot in the moment we're in. We are being pushed in ways we never were before. And a lot of the principles that we held are embedded there and must be the case. And I think a lot of people on thus far today have spoken to that. One of those is that when we think about economic development, we want to make sure that the process of pulling people together is inclusive. And that means the variety of people involved are from government to across sectors, government to business to nonprofit organizations to labor to community groups, but also cut across geographies. That we know economies are regional. They don't just live in one city or even one county. They're often multi-county, and that the kind of the regional dynamic has to vary, but building a partnership that holds together that conversation, I think, is something we heard a lot. And Chelsea, you mentioned this a little bit in the beginning of kind of what's the role of the state in seeing across these connections. When we had the Regions Rise Together listening tour, we called it last fall, we continued to hear that after place. We would like additional support in capacity building to hold a conversation at the regional scale so that everyone can participate. But it's a conversation that isn't just an economic development. It talks about the economy. It talks about workforce. It talks about transportation, growth, resiliency in a climate space. And so those having particular voices on the ground that pull that together is key. And that's what we speak to when we talk about an integrated approach. And when I speak to the Strategic Growth Council, you will see that that's a lot of the approach that's taken there. If you go to the next slide here. So a couple of examples of investments that I wanted to highlight. I think we all wish we were in a different economic moment and a different budget moment. But we are very pleased to say that some of the investment that was proposed in the governor's January budget in the Fresno Drive initiative has remained. And that's important. And it's important because that type of initiative is exactly an example of the kind of process I'm talking about. It was inclusive in terms of the organizations that were involved. It thought long-term. It put issues of race and equity at the center of the table and said, what do those mean in this community? What voices and what people have been left out? And what are specific actions we can take to change that trajectory? And so a couple of things. One is the investment in ag innovation and a connection between UC Merced and Fresno State as part of that. And that's an industry that is located in that region. It's an industry that has tremendous opportunity. It's not the only part of California, of course, where ag and ag innovation is important, but it's an investment in how to make some of those transformative opportunities in ag in the Fresno region and connecting up to Merced, which I think is actually a slightly new step, and the relationship between those two universities. There's a project that has also just been launched in Kern County and Bakersfield. Again, we were able to support through funds from the Labor and Workforce Development Agency to get going off the ground. Now, I think Kate Gordon mentioned this. We are participants in a process that is regions up, that's regions led, but we wanted to invest in it and make it happen. We hope to be able to do that in more regions in the future. And that's going to be contingent on having those kinds of funds available. But that was a very important symbolic role for the Labor and Workforce Development Agency to take dollars that have often been in workforce, which is incredibly important, but put them into a process that was about much more. It was about understanding how to diversify the economy, thinking about the transition of those industries into how, as they evolve, what they become. It was about how the community grows. Bakersfield and the surrounding Kern County have a wide variety of environments and places, and so those are examples of that. And then I think what I also really wanted to address is the fact that the Strategic Growth Council is investing in things. And just before that, the role of philanthropy is important, that across all of this, and I think this conversation here is indicative of that. We have the federal government, we have different people from the state government, we have people in regions. We're only effective if we align our efforts towards something bigger. And so when we launch Regions Rise Together, we work with my colleague, Kathleen Kelly-Janis, and a lot of philanthropic leaders of how do we align resources philanthropy is doing to support some of these initiatives. And so that I think was just announced today from the Irvine Foundation investment in Fresno, in part to leverage the work that's happened in Drive. And Drive also, in some ways, built on investment that Strategic Growth Council had made in Fresno through forming a network and a set of partners that were able to work together differently. Philanthropy and others came in to help make that process go forward. The state government was able to invest in some of those funds to continue it forward. And then philanthropy is continuing to invest in that. And I think that kind of partnership across institutions to leverage something bigger is really what we're going to have to do to be successful. And so that's the Regions Rise Together spirit is very much that. So I want to end just with a couple of examples of investments from the Strategic Growth Council that might be important or helpful for you all to think about. If we go to the next slide here. The first is that, and what I'm speaking to are the dollars that come from the greenhouse gas reduction funds. So these are California climate investments. They're paid for by cap and trade dollars. And those investments are really trying to fundamentally shift our economy and our structure and our society in a way that becomes much less carbon intensive, and also directly invest in the communities that have been most impacted over time by pollution and by other factors. And so a couple programs that are mentioned here, the Affordable Housing Sustainable Communities, a lot of acronyms, but many of you know that there's technical assistance to access some of those dollars. And it's a little bit on a rolling basis, but please let us know if you are a community that is interested in those. We sometimes hear, oh, how do we get those? They're difficult to get. That program has evolved significantly over time, and so it's good to check back in it. There are particular set-asides for rural areas, for other areas. And so I think that there are all parts of the state, in theory, should be able to access to it. And I think we continue to work to ensure, or try to work to get more of those projects out to more parts of California. But there's technical assistance to access that. Boost is a particular program in partnership with the Strategic Growth Council in Institute for Local Government. There are a number of communities, Bakersfield, others who are directly get dollars to help those communities get ready to apply for additional funds through the program. And then we've actually just launched a partnership on these community education specialists who are able to really help some of the climate smart investments for agricultural communities and others as well. So TA is a side of it to get ready. Let's go to the next one, the next slide here. So I wanted to then just mention two specific programs. One, I mentioned AHSC, but I want to mention Sustainable Agricultural Lands Conservation and AHSC, just because I think they're indicative of what we are trying to do. We are in a conversation about economic development and economic recovery. But we're also in a conversation about how do we recover in a way that doesn't go back to how things were. And we grow in a different way. There's the growth side that makes sure that everyone participates, particularly those that have not been a part of the economic growth historically. And there's also a side of the growth that's about physically the land development patterns. And that remains a core principle and goal of the state. And a couple of these programs are trying to get at that. The Sustainable Agricultural Lands Conservation Program is investing in preserving agricultural land. And as you can see here, it has a set aside of a portion of the funds from the greenhouse gas reduction funds. And 92,000 acres have been protected through this program. So there's another round of that's going to be coming forward in December of this year. And so that's an opportunity, again, for many, many parts of California. If we go to the next, Affordable Housing Sustainable Communities. This is a major program. Really, California is one of two of the largest housing programs that exist in the state. My colleague from HCD might speak to this as well. But this is one that's taking on that integrated approach. It's trying to think not only just about housing and affordable housing, but also transportation. How do we build housing? How do we build infrastructure in communities where people can get around in different ways and aren't just reliant on driving their own cars, but also to have some of those dollars invest in infrastructure in those particular communities. So wanted to bring those up as examples of funding where the state is putting dollars on the ground in communities. They are not in our kind of often siloed world in policy. They're not in, quote, the economic development bucket, but they serve an incredibly important role as part of economic development generally. And again, an example, a community that is trying to revitalize its downtown, that's able to secure resources from affordable housing and sustainable communities for a project in the middle of their downtown that is a well-designed building that contributes to the public space, that contributes to kind of upgrading the quality of urban design, that supports walkability, becomes an example of what that community could look like if there was more of that brings back a lot of the life that we once had in the core of many of our communities. And I think that's the city of Madera, there's a project that's going to be going forward there that it's an example of that. You start to see that infrastructure coming back that strengthens the center of our areas. So final slide, I think, is just to make the point, go to that I mean, Regions Rise Together was launched with a particular set of conversations in the San Joaquin Valley and the Inland Empire and the far northern part of the state, but it really means all regions of California. And it means an approach where we create an economic recovery that's regions up, and that we want, that I think our goal long-term is, and this is perhaps we can get to in the conversation, what would be an infrastructure at the state level that in an ongoing basis could continue to support, lift up, connect between all the great economic development initiatives that are happening across California. That's part of the connective tissue that Kate spoke about earlier. And it's part of the role and why we had a partnership with California Forward and the California Stewardship Network that is doing that. And the state government wishes also to be a partner to continue that so that we can have a longer term role for regional economic development. With that, I'll close and hopefully hear from our colleague in housing. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you so much, Egon. That was so much information. We're so happy that, you know, the state government is listening and responding and bringing these groups of folks together. I know that for the policy nerds out there like me, we've been closely watching AB 3205, which is the Regions Rise Grant Program legislation as it goes through the legislature, just to see, because it could be a mechanism where if you have regional collaboration, the state could step in. And of course, we know that the budget was turned on its head as far as, you know, any state funding goes, but just the fact that ideas like that are getting on the table, getting through committees is really exciting to see that there's that response and that legislators are also paying attention. So thank you so much for your presentation. I'm going to check to see if Jessica is on, because I'm still not sure if she was able to make it on. Jessica, tell me that you are here somewhere. And stay on also, Egon, because we have questions at the end. Jessica, are you there? Anywhere? Unmute? Anywhere? Okay, well, it looks like Jessica did not get on the call today, but that good news is that it leaves us with plenty of time for some Q&A. And I actually have one here for you, Egon. It's how do you determine where cap and trade dollars are reallocated back to communities? To clarify, are all communities eligible to apply, or is it invite only?
No, that's a great question. So in terms of reallocated back, we maybe want to clarify. So the cap and trade program is, there are a wide variety of programs, and there's different eligibility for each of those. And so in all parts of California should be eligible for some number of them, but I think you have to check on each one. But it's not calculated such that the dollars that are generated from one particular place directly come back to that particular place. It's structured as a set of auctions that get centralized, and then there's a series of funding programs that are directly trying to invest in advancing the initiatives of that. And I think many of you know, portions of that, the legislature has established pieces of it on an ongoing basis. So 20% on an ongoing basis goes to the Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities program writ large. And then within that, 10% of that program goes to the Sustainable Agricultural Lands Conservation Program, so trying to conserve land. So where then those housing dollars, housing and infrastructure dollars get spent, as I said, it's an ongoing basis to really try to expand to get to more parts of California, but it's kind of within that bucket of that share of the funds. And I should note the auction dollars go up and down on
each year.
Each year, yeah, depending on the dynamics.
Great. It's so interesting and such a good use of funds that has a lot of creative avenues to help our communities. I have another question for you, and it is from Allison. I think it's a great question about how is the state using these funds to support regions with EDA funding that is available, specifically the intersection between greenhouse gas funds and the state's, I'm assuming, workforce development board's investment in high road jobs that are uniting outcomes on equity, climate, and labor. What are your thoughts on that?
So yeah, it's a great question. So the one of the programs that I didn't mention that was in the budget are something called high road training partnerships. So that's an example of an initiative that's really trying to invest in an approach that links employers. It's very much employer-led, and sometimes labor unions, though not exclusively, in an industry where there can be access to quality jobs. So think of the Port of Oakland or Port of LA Long Beach, a partnership that really connects people into those industries and into high quality jobs. So it's training, but training that's employer-led, that's much more designing a system that is, quote, high road, which is about high quality jobs. Now, I bring that up as an example because the intersections you're talking about are really something that there's not a kind of programmatic line that connects the Strategic Growth Council, the Economic Development Administration, and the labor and workforce funds. That's something we actually have to align within our regions and collectively. And so it's something, the project in Kern County and Bakersfield is very much an example of how we are doing that and how we are thinking about trying to do that work. There's been investment in just transition studies and carbon neutrality studies. There's investment in economic development. And so how do we do all that together in a way? A high road training partnership could be an outcome of that, one of the outcomes of that kind of work. But that integrative thinking, I think, is incumbent on all of us. And maybe just make one more point. It's in part why we're emphasizing the idea of building this partnership and kind of having an institution or set of institutions really set the table and hold that conversation. And I think we see that 3 Corps is an example of that kind of institution in your respective region. The Kern County Community Foundation is an example of that kind of institution. And I think each region is going to look a little bit different of who that institution, or maybe it's 3 or 4, but it's really about forming a partnership that cuts across, that then allows for that kind of integrative thinking.
Which it brings me perfectly to my next point. The incredible Rachel Hatch has said in the comments that from the McConnell Foundation that she has an offer to other community leaders on the call to learn from her experience. She's up in Shasta County about their experience with affordable housing and sustainable communities, because they were recently awarded a really great project, and downtown Reading and the city of Reading itself has really done some great work with that program. And I think that anybody out there who's thinking of utilizing those funds, this is a great opportunity to reach out to Rachel offline. It's rhatch@mcconnellfoundation.org. She's an incredible resource. She's one of the first people that I met when I came up to the North State working in disaster recovery. So that's a great offer, and I hope that many of you take her up on that offer. If you check in the chat, you can get her email address. It's right in there. And then we had a question about the bill number for Regions Rise, and I believe it's AB 3205, but I will check. And then Malinda, if you're still on the line, I have a question for you. Are you still there?
I'm still here.
Oh, wonderful. One of our participants is asking if refurbishing a building counts as a construction project for EDA grants.
Yes, it does. So just make sure you own the building, and their NEPA is still required, but it's easier if it's already constructed. And of course, the most important question is, what are you going to do with it, and how is it going to help you create or retain jobs or help you become more economically resilient?
Great, great. And while we're on the top,
Chelsea, I was just going to say that Rachel Hatch is also the perfect example of that, a kind of community leader who's kind of core to building this kind of economic partnership. So glad you're on the call too. I think that's the important, like each region, people are using both, the organizations are different, the institutions are different, but it's kind of a core set of maybe leadership principles that really are able to kind of pull people together and hold a conversation that cuts across issues and topics and geographies.
Right. And I know there's always a lot of discussion on, urban versus rural and how we're so different. And, I've heard that a lot because I moved from Sacramento a year ago, and I never realized, how urban Sacramento was until I, passed so many cows on the freeway up here. And it's true, there's a lot of differences, but there's also a lot we can learn from each other. And I think that this kind of cross-sector collaboration is really important when it comes to those things, and especially when it comes to disaster recovery. And that's why COVID-19 has, like I said, kind of even the playing field, because we're all trying to figure out solutions and trying to get through this together and trying to utilize this funding as best we can to really help those who need it. And that's why these conversations are so important. Another question for you, Malinda, is, we talked about what projects have been successful. Do you have a couple of ideas for us about what activities are not allowable through EDA?
Oh, yes, sure. So right off the top, we don't do housing. That's what housing and urban development is all about. And we don't do gaming. We don't do golf courses. Recreation in general can be a little problematic. Um, and, um, and I think one of the things that you have to, even though, you know, our focus is on the outcome and like job creation, job retention, all of those things, which I've said over and over. None of the money can go directly from the grantee to businesses. Like we do not do forgivable loans. You have to pay the loans back. That's why our RLFs revolve. Yeah, it's more about creating that ecosystem that allows businesses to grow and flourish. So yeah, so those are kind of things that we can't do, those issues. Yeah.
But I really would urge all of our colleagues on the call today to reach out to Malinda, reach out to Jessica and Egon, and continue this conversation. I know that we are just now starting, and the conversations need to continue. And I'm just curious if anybody else out there has any questions. Otherwise, I'm just going to keep asking my own. Does anybody have any for the chat?
Well, I was actually going to maybe just mention, because Melinda said specifically EDA is not funding housing. And so we didn't hear from our colleague at HCD, yeah. But there are funds. I mean, certainly I mentioned a program that funds the construction of housing. There's also some recent funds that the LEAP and the REAP program that are directly coming to communities that came out of a trailer bill from last year that's helping communities prepare significantly on housing. And it's actually funding, very important, it's actually funding that goes to regions. And I note that as significant. That's the type of potential policy shift that we have talked about and considered in California, but it's an example of one where there's a pot of dollars that's directly going to the regions to then redistribute. In this case, to the metropolitan planning organizations, not to get too technical, but you know, in the Bay Area, there's an 8-county region. Southern California, there's kind of a variety of regions. And in the San Joaquin Valley, it's actually all 8 counties. Each of them has a separate metropolitan planning organization, but these dollars actually are being centralized for all 8 of them. But that's a source of funding that is helping with some planning, and I'm happy to provide more details about that.
How would somebody go about learning more about that?
They would find, let me find the link, and I'll put it directly into the chat. Okay. But it is through HCD, and then but a lot of those have actually come directly, so it might depend on where you are. Okay. And maybe this is a point that's relevant. We all live in regions, but those regions sort of organize somewhat differently. And I know John Wentworth is on the call, who'd put in a couple of comments there, who's thought a lot about this question, as many, about there's not one set of regions across California. Some of us live in an economic development district that might be a couple counties, but our metropolitan planning organization might be a different set of counties. And some of the rural areas, our regions might be defined by a set of natural resources. So I think for all of us in the work we're doing, kind of knowing what those different regional geographies is actually important and relevant as we start to do this work, because that integrated approach is going to have to cut across them. And so the Metropolitan Planning Organization, though, is the critical one on this, the LEAP and the REAP dollars. Okay.
Okay. And is there any funding through the Strategic Growth Council that could be used as a match for an EDA grant?
I believe, and this may be a question for Malinda, I believe that any funds that are directly from the state could be applied as a match for the EDA grant. Is that correct? Because they're not federal dollars, I believe, cannot be used as a match. But if they are state funds, and all the Strategic Growth Council funds would be state funds, could count as a match. Is that correct, Malinda?
So yes, that is correct. It does have to go for the same project and the same timeline. And the only federal dollars, the only federal grants that can be matched are CDBG dollars. So you can use those as match for federal grants. Otherwise, it would have to be a federal loan. So there is a lot of possibility out there, but you do have to do your homework to get all of these things to align. I would start early and coordinate frequently with the various funders to get things to line up.
Right, right. I know that can be tricky when you're layering in those different funding options and getting a lot of different hands in the pool, if you will. Malinda, I am just curious. I know that there were some organizations such as 3Corps that were offered the opportunity to have non-competitive grant funds allocated from the CARES Act, from EDA. Right. And I'm just wondering if you can explain who those organizations were and why they were chosen for that.
So, right. So EDA's model, this has been in place for decades, is we have economic development districts, which 3Corps is one. We only have 5 or 6 in the state. They're not all currently funded. But these are organizations that are responsible for keeping the comprehensive economic development strategy for that region up to date. We do give them a small annual grant to keep that going and to be kind of the leader and coordinator of these resources and economic development in their region. They are all at least 2 counties large, and they are self-defined. We don't come in and define them. They define themselves and they ask for designation. The most recent one that we named in California was the Greater Bay Area. And we're still working with them. We haven't actually brought them into the program yet. So that was one of the grantees that we were able to give them additional funds with a prescribed scope of work that was specifically designed to address the impact of the pandemic on their region. Another one was our university centers, which in California are Chico State and Fresno State, and they were given a little additional money, again, to deal with business assistance and helping communities with data and things like that to address the needs of the pandemic. And the bigger one was our revolving loan funds, which we have 35 or 38 in California. Some of them are huge. Like down in Los Angeles, we have some really large ones. 3Corps happens to operate one of ours. We have them all over the state. I'm hoping we're going to be adding some additional ones. The revolving loan funds are, CARES Act came out with a lot of great money for businesses, either through the Economic Injury Loan Program or the PPP program. But not all businesses were actually eligible for those. So some businesses were denied, and the RLF is what's called alternative lending. It's for riskier businesses, and we were able to, by a formula, provide them additional funds to meet the needs of their small businesses that weren't eligible for the EIDL or the PPP loan programs. So getting the money, hopefully, those are just started to be announced. We had a very quick, you had 30 days to get your applications in, and we had 30 days to process them. And I just noticed this morning that the awards are being made. So,
well, that's good to know. Hot off the presses.
Yeah. But that was one way that we could get money into communities that we have long established relationships with to meet the needs of businesses and communities, and get them on the path to recovery.
Right. I think it's important to note a couple of things about those revolving loan funds. And first, it is just the unique need that those loan funds serve to get to businesses that wouldn't necessarily be able to find financing on the traditional market. They don't fit in the mold. And especially for regions such as ours, where banks these are risky loans. These are businesses that just went through a disaster and we struggle with public safety power shutoffs. And they're not the typical, you go into Wells Fargo and, talk over your finances and they hand over whatever you need. These are people where you need to do a deep dive in there and really find out what kind of loan, what their needs are, maybe mentor them through that process. And I think that it's a really interesting niche that EDA is able to help local organizations fill to keep them from going to predatory online lenders. And I know, in our area, not a lot of people even realize that as a community development financial institution, we have these funds available. So I think that's a little, informational thing that we need to work on, just as lending institutions, that there are these funds available, and that, EDA does this great service by providing funds for us to get to businesses on the ground.
Well, and one thing to note with these, the RLFs is great lenders like 3Corps, and I'm not just saying that because you're here, you guys do have a great relationship, a great reputation for this, but you also have a great relationship with the banks in your area. And often what it takes for banks to make a loan to a small business is to have like a third party, like one of our RLFs or a USDA IRP, that's an intermediary relending program operator, step in and partner with the bank and kind of de-risk the bank a little bit. So small business lending is complicated. It is fantastic that Congress, provided the additional EIDL funds and the PPP, but it's also really great that they recognized it wasn't going to be enough, and that there's a lot of small businesses in our community that are just not there yet. They don't have the good credit scores, or they have been too cash-based for a long time, and they need a kind of support that the big boys don't offer. So it's a very successful program. It's one of my favorite programs at EDA. And it's, the world of business lending is just complicated. And the more I learn about it, the more I say it's just complicated.
Right. And I think that California Forward, the California Stewardship Network, and the Economic Summit always focus on that triple bottom line and addressing equity, and the fact that a lot of people were not able to receive those economic injury disaster loans or paycheck protection program loans. And there is a huge need still. And those are the people like you're talking about, Malinda, who might not have, they're not experts on keeping their finances, streamlined and being able to take a stack of documents to their bank, and they really need that extra help. And it's great that EDA is able to fill that need. And I just want to give a huge shout out to your organization as a whole for pivoting so quickly to let us as an RLF lender utilize those funds to the best of our ability, whether it be with different interest rates or with different deferment periods that are specifically addressing this need that we've never seen before. An entire organization like the Economic Development Administration really got on that and listened to us as lenders to address those issues. And I just think it's great. And we're hopeful that we'll be able to, at least in our region, get that money out quickly and address some of those equity issues that we have with a lot of people not being able to secure that other federal funding. So that's been really great. And it's been a great partnership, and we thank you for that.
Well, one thing I'd like to note about the RLF is, especially in the state of California, we have a lot of non-English speaking businesses out there. And whether they're concentrated in the urban areas or they're throughout our rural areas, there's just a lot of companies that have come over, they've been successful, but they don't really speak English and they don't operate within the normal banking industry. And a number of our RLF providers specialize in non-English speaking communities. So that is a special niche that the regular banking world, and which, you know, the SBA normally operates through to a great extent. There's just a big schism between those two worlds, and alternative lending, which is what an RLF is, there's a big need for it out there, but you don't realize it until you kind of, you know, scratch under the surface and you look at all of the small businesses that are really quite marginal, and our economies are really dependent upon them to become stronger and stay in business.
Right. If somebody listening today wanted to find out who runs your RLFs or how they can suggest those organizations to businesses that they work with, how would they go about doing that?
So the easiest way to do it is go to our website, eda.gov, and click on the resources page. And you will find on that page all of our economic development districts and all of our RLF operators. Now, it may not be perfectly up to date, but that gives you a really good start. If that doesn't get you the answer that you want, you can email me, and I will do some sleuthing and find out, you know, exactly what it is. Our RLF specialists are great at keeping track of who's operating in one area, what their geography is, and keeping up-to-date contact information on them. So we can get you the information, but I'd go to the resources page at eda.gov first.
That's great. That's great. And
No,
go ahead. Go ahead.
I have a question actually for everyone in the group, and also maybe Malinda as well. Obviously, if we were doing this in person, we could kind of gather, look at each other, of course, but have a conversation, because one of the things we haven't gotten into as much is how the folks on that are remaining on this call on the phone, how would you want to see some of the federal funds and state funds, where they exist, kind of work together in an integrative way for you achieve some of the goals that you're trying to accomplish within your respective regions, or what would be some particular changes or suggestions that you would make? I mean, I think that we are open to listening and hearing, and that's part of what this process is all about. So if you have thoughts or suggestions, not just how to access funds that exist, but how funds could be adjusted or policies could be adjusted that are reflective of the regional differences, we are always open for that. And that was very much the spirit of Regions Rise Together, was really trying to hear that. And just as a note, it's not related to this topic, but one of the things that has come out of that initiative is a very distinct effort to broaden who gets put on appointments across the state, to ensure that the voices and representation of a wide variety of perspectives, but including geography, is part of the mix. So just putting that out there. Curious on that. And Malinda, I had a question for you a little bit, because you mentioned this before around how that EDA has long thought about regions. And I know this from decades ago. One of my old bosses, Jim Golub, had written a strategy for you all on cluster-based economic development, I think almost 20 years ago, probably more than 20 years ago. And that right. it remains an approach that's reflective. I'm curious your thoughts on sort of as the role of regions and regional economic development has ebbed and flowed. Do you think we're now at a moment of people really recognizing the need for us to do regions up economic development, and really now obviously economic recovery? What are thoughts that you have kind of for what you've seen in some of these prior efforts that may have been more or less effective as people begin to do that now?
So if you look at it historically, we have rediscovered industry clusters, regional economic development, and the importance of entrepreneurship with almost every administration in the federal government. You look back and every one of them can say, oh, we're the one that did that first. That's kind of amusing, but our approach to it has been that because we were created on the concept of bottom-up economic development, that what a geography needs is can only be defined by what that geography, that top-down economic development doesn't really work. So, which is why, you know, we have been doing designating economic development districts since the late 60s. They haven't always been called SEDS, they were OEDPs before that. But this concept of having a regional strategy to analyze, you know, your strengths and your weaknesses and your opportunities, you know, good basic planning. And we believe that economic development is actually based on good planning. And one of the things that's important about our SEDS is they aren't just good for EDA. They're actually a blueprint for an economy to grow. It's a 3 Corps is currently working on a new SEDS, and they should look at it as this is the region's blueprint for how they're going to achieve economic resilience and sustainability and growth. And you can also use these SEDS for other federal agencies. So USDA has used our SEDS, you know, as the basis for a number of their programs. HUD has accepted them for a number of their programs. There is work back in DC on, you know, how to align the requirements of these various plans so that they are more cohesive. But our approach has always been that economies don't really understand economic or political boundaries. That the way that communities grow is they're not competing with their neighbors. They should be collaborating with their neighbors. They should be, you know, the manufacturing plant may go into city A, but some of the supply chain manufacturers could be going into city B, or, you know, the employees live in this community, but they actually work over here. The economies don't have rigid boundaries, and but they do kind of congregate around geographies. So when you look at what areas that we've designated as economic development districts, those were communities that came together and said, we have more in common than we don't. And so it's those 3 counties, 4 counties coming together and telling us that they wanted to be designated as an economic development district, and they wanted to work together to achieve common goals. So that's always been kind of our approach to that. Some states in the country, on a state level, they have taken it to say, yes, this is a good approach. And they have gone to the extreme of making the economic development districts part of state law as well. And they have coordinated their programs with the districts. Other states have not. But, you know, a number of the districts we have here in California, and we don't have that many, it would always be great to have more, but like 3 Corps or Superior California, they have been working together and collaborating for decades, and it's in their DNA now. So working with them as a unit and recognizing that, I think would be good for the state if it's, you know, compatible with different priorities. But one thing I think we have to be careful of is, you know, the federal government shouldn't be telling the state what to do. And I may be getting into some problems here. And the state, you know, we have our own roles and we have our own responsibilities, and we can collaborate. We just have to be careful with how we approach it sometimes.
Right. But I think the most important thing is just talking and communicating. And Heidi makes a good point in the comments here that it seems as though most grants are just one-offs and they don't build upon each other. And I think that's such an easy issue to solve by just talking. And my hope is that the one good thing to come out of this pandemic is the fact that we realize we can have these conversations and not be in the same room, but accomplish the same thing. And we can break down those boundaries and really think bigger. I know with our SEDS process, usually it's, here's a blueprint for Butte, Glen, and Tehama County. And, we're less than 500,000 people and we're going to do our best here. But this time we're thinking bigger and we're including partners from other places in our region and learning from them and hopefully collaborating on things that have worked for them, things that haven't worked for them we'll steer clear of, and really just having those conversations. And I think that's where, when Egon, you talk about the state fostering collaboration, we have capacity issues here. And so we can't be everything to everyone. And our local jurisdictions don't necessarily have economic development staff. So it's really important to have those conversations facilitated and think big picture. What could all of the North State benefit from? What kind of programs, like we have biomass, that it's the whole state that needs to start worrying about what we're going to do with our waste and how are we going to use that. And wood waste, especially for those of us in more forested areas, which we share, with our colleagues at the Sierra Business Council. And it's just been really nice to have more of those conversations and really open up a dialogue so that we can say, yeah, we are more alike than we are different, and we should learn from each other. And, my idea isn't mine and only mine and nobody else gets it. I'm happy to share it with you. And I love it when I talk to my colleagues in other regions and they say, oh yeah, this worked great for us. Like, here's some ideas and whatever we can do to help. And it's been a unique thing to experience in the last year, especially with the help of the California Stewardship Network, but just, in all of GoBiz's work and trying to get everybody in the same room, it's been great. And I know that, I don't think we realize how similar we are until you sit in a room and say, oh my gosh, we just went through that last year. And here's what we did to adjust or pivot or solve this problem. And it's been a really great experience. And you're completely right, Malinda, that, economic development does not, it's not bound by county lines. It's not bound by Senate or Assembly districts or congressional districts. But it does need to focus on equity and making sure that we really address everybody's issue and work together to find policies that work for everyone.
And I'd like to point out, Heidi is we've worked with Heidi a number of times over the years. And, she's in that unusual circumstance that she, her region actually covers 2 states, 3 or 4 California counties. I don't remember how many Nevada counties. And my colleague that covers Nevada, we've had conference calls with Heidi. I know that she works great with everybody in that region, but I think she's a great example of how collaboration really works across these weird geographic boundaries. Because if you're there in the Tahoe Basin, I never know whether I'm in Nevada or California or, and it honestly doesn't really matter, except that there are some different laws and different policies, but it's still a cohesive community around a lake that shares a lot of the same challenges and opportunities.
Right. And Patrick makes a good point in the comments that, when we're talking about grants, maybe this is an opportunity to provide greater accessibility of data on where grants are occurring so that we could map it out and see who's doing what and build off of that, instead of always, we know what's happening in our bubble, but we don't know what's happening in the bubble next door. So perhaps there's some, like Egon, like the state, some greater connectivity of what's happening so that the strategy naturally flows through that, which I think would be a really great, activity for the state to figure out how we can do that, because, our little organizations can't, but perhaps there's some sort of network of connectivity that could really be put together.
It's a great point. It's something we've heard a ton about. And I think this is, and Malinda, I really like this broader conversation of kind of, how do we collectively inspire this type of work that's regional economic development, inclusive, that looks at these very geographies, its regions up, but then support it to happen and then make the connections. Data is an example of interconnective tissue. but one that's not top down, but it's sort of both and. And an example, we were speaking with the leaders of the biggest regional governments in California, the metropolitan planning organizations, and the head of the institution from San Diego, Sandag, said, we have so much data on the structure of the San Diego economy, the economic recovery. We would love to share it with the governor's task force as you're thinking about broader economic recovery. And I had started conversation about that a while back with others saying, San Diego knows certain things about San Diego that other regions maybe haven't mapped about their own respective region,
Right.
and we could share across. And it's kind of, you build on these various analytic work that's happening at a regional basis. And yeah, maybe it has to get stitched together to look across California, but there's such incredible examples, and it's creating that larger network that is a key piece, so that we're learning from each other. And I think, as Glenda Humiston said earlier, we're not reinventing the wheel. We're kind of leveraging these great efforts in each place.
Exactly. Exactly. And like we rely on our colleagues at Chico State and the Center for Economic Development for some of our data needs. And the more that we talk, the more that we realize that a lot of the things we need, they already have, and they can provide, whether it be capacity or data or mapping or something like that. And it's just a matter of communicating. And it would be great if there was a statewide, connective tissue for all of these things. And I think it's on everybody's mind. So the more we talk about it, we can will it to come, I'm sure.
Well, but there's a capacity issue.
Right.
We focus on normally on economically distressed communities, and they often don't have the capacity to address a lot of the needs in their community. So they're very reliant on a Chico State or a Fresno State to help them, but I think and I'm speaking personally here, in kind of my perfect world, there would be some sort of structure that helped people navigate through state resources and federal resources, and got them to these communities to understand like how important planning is, so that they can invest in planning, and then figure out, if they're going to implement that plan, how they navigate through all these other resources in order to fund these projects. I don't know exactly what that's going to look like, but I do know that if you can identify in a urban area that there's a need for it, just think about a really impoverished community that their need is probably 10 times that much, because they don't have the resources. So I think we're at an interesting time, but I don't want us to lose sight of those economically distressed areas that were distressed before. And once the recovery's underway, they're still going to be distressed. How can we help them build their capacity to navigate through all these great resources and achieve prosperity?
It's a great point, Malinda. Couldn't agree more. And that's a lot of the Strategic Growth Council funds are directly in those types of communities. And I think one great lesson is, how do we leverage all the work we're doing collectively across each other? Chelsea, I know it's 4, so it's probably
right. So I just want to thank you guys. I appreciate your patience with us filling this space. I think it was a wonderful conversation, and I hope that we all connect again and we keep this conversation going. And if anybody needs to contact any of us, our information has been up there for a while. And thank you everyone for your participation. We so appreciate your time and spending the afternoon with you. And so much love to Egon and Malinda. It's so nice to see your face.
Yes, it's been too long. It may be a while longer.
So thank you guys. And we're going to end this here, but have a wonderful day.